this is a very important topic, and there are so many layers to it. On one hand, you speak about the media and how the media has been horrific in most places, especially in the West. But it's also a case that we have to examine, African media as well. On many parts of the continent, you see many of the stories that are just copying or following the Western narrative or the Western lens, and part of this is due to sort of like, I mean, this is why the story of Palestine, the story of Gaza is important to all of us, because it kind of the dimensions of the story kind of like perforate over so many aspects of our lives. So what I mean by this is that when we think about how African countries or the media in African countries are following the Western line, what we mean by this is that in many cases there's been a kind of demolishing of foreign coverage in domestic media. And so what this means is that you have African media often just taking the stories that are available in the Western media, because the journalists are neither trained nor are there budgets to cover these issues, right? The second thing regarding this is, when we think about the Hague group that was formed, if you consider, there are only 2 or 3 African countries on the Hague group. It's Namibia, it's South Africa, and it's Senegal, I believe. And in a continent of more than 50 countries, right? It's like 54. Why is it that there are so few countries that have joined this? And this tells you a lot about the kind of dependency that many African countries still have on the West. And to take Israel or to join this court case, for instance, at the ICJ would mean that Western countries would essentially punish many of these African countries when it comes to aid, when it comes to trade. The second reason and why this topic is also so important is that over the past 10 years or so, Netanyahu has essentially, embarked on a kind of charm offensive on the African continent, and that kind of involved going to many West African countries, as well as East African countries, in terms of providing aid, in terms of helping with security, with military assistance, and basically what it has done is that it has created a kind of tight diplomatic relationship with a certain number of African countries, and as a result, this charm offensive, as they call it, has actually worked in a way. So we part of the problem is that we get the sense that many African countries are pro-Palestine, many Africans are pro-Palestine, but the work that is being done on the ground by many Israelis, be it in Congo, be it in Uganda, be it in Kenya, it's a lot more vibrant than we actually imagine. And so I just thought that could be an opening salvo in response to your statement.
Well, Azad, that opening salvo actually just speaks so much. It actually speaks volumes. And I think, Ireti, if you'd like to just come in on the discussion, because Azad has basically unpacked so much as far as Africa is concerned, media and journalism on the African continent in particular. And for someone like yourself, also an award-winning journalist, for someone who focuses on geopolitics on your own show in Nigeria, and just your reading, and also at the same time founding an organization called African Journalists Against Genocide, AJAG, as an acronym, and providing the space for African journalists together to discuss Israel, to discuss the geopolitics of the region and what impact this is. How crucial, how important is this for African journalists in particular, against what Azad had to say and his unpacking and what we are seeing on the continent?
So, good evening again. Thank you so much. I liked how Hazard started, Azad, as I call him, started, and I'll take on from there. He's so absolutely correct in the sense that, the way African media tends to parrot Western narratives, often when it comes to conflict, not just the Israel, Gaza, Palestine conflict, but when it comes to conflicts overall. Indeed, even when it comes to African conflicts. So one of the things that we try to do on my show, and in fact, the basis of Borderlines, my show, was actually to educate Nigerians at home, our viewers in the diaspora, to let them know that there is always another conversation. There is always another angle. And we approach things from the angle of the global south, which is what we do quite differently. So we won't, in fact, what you will tend to see is you'll find us challenging Western narratives. I do that a lot with my guests because all 99.999% of all my guests are international people. So that's what we do. Now, when we talk about the way African media actually manages and sort of presents this genocide, let me tell you something. As Africans, we can't forget, and I think you started that in your introduction. We must remember that ours is a continent that is still in birth. It's a continent that is still growing. It's a continent that is still developing. But unfortunately, it's a continent that hasn't been blessed with the best leaders. And when you don't have good leaders, you have low economic growth. And where you have low economic growth, you have people looking to the outside. And often when people look to the outside, they're looking to what we call in Nigeria the abroad. So there is something going on now that I call the fear of the American visa. Everything is joined, everything is it's all by design, right? They don't start alone. The fact that now, in order for you to get an American visa, certainly from Nigeria, I can't speak for South Africa, but I imagine it applies across the board, is they have to go through your social media records. So you can just imagine what that means. They, anybody, I mean, it doesn't affect me, one, because I have no desire to go to America, two, I have a British passport. But imagine if I was going for an American visa, there's no way I would get it. The chances are there's probably no way I would get a British visa because one, the work that I do, two, outside of my work as a person, and I think we have to get to discussing that. We're journalists, one, we are professionals, but we're also functional members of a community. So even separating my journalism as a person, I know where my position is. Right. So if they were to go through over my social media account, there's no way they would give me a visa. No way. In fact, I'm sure no European country would let me in, right? Albeit Israel did take me to Israel in December last year. I mean, not last year, 2023, immediately after October 7th. And they would have checked my social media. But I guess at the time, they thought they were taking in journalists because they wanted us to see what had happened on October 7th. So there's that. So that's number two. Number three is the fact that when I created AJAG, yes, it was seeded by my anger, my fury, my pain about the death, the murder, and the assassination of Hanas and all his colleagues that were killed 2 weeks ago. Indeed, the killing of Palestinian um, journalist. It's something that had always infuriated and annoyed me. But with Anaz, it was different in the sense that I had gotten so used to seeing him that when the person on TV becomes your son, your brother, it becomes so familiar that you feel you know them. We all know what that feels like. We're journalists, people get to know your work and they feel they know you. That's how I felt about Anaz. So once that happened, after the tears, there always needs to be action. And that's why it occurred to me that I'm certainly not the only person feeling like this. Number one. Number two, let me put the word out. If African journalists want to join me in the video campaign, and indeed it was, it was overwhelming. Um, but number four is that what became also critically important, and that's the possibly the point of your question, and to sort of underscore what Azad has said, what becomes critically important is that 9 out of 10 times, the narrative globally in any part of the world is often shaped by what is being said by either Western people of, our Western journalists or analysts or whatever. People were forgetting that Africa also had a voice. Indeed, South Africa led the whole world to take Israel to court in the ICJ, and everybody else couldn't. But after that, everybody forgot that Africa, you don't invite Africa into the conversation. Indeed, Palestinians may not have known that in Africa there was a lot of work being done by excellent journalists, both on a higher level, an individual level, on a street level. All of that, the reasons that I created African Journalists Against Genocide. Our objective is not just going to be for Gaza, but of course, there's always a catalyst for everything. Indeed, for everything I do. That's why I'm always able to explain what seeded it. Gaza, the killing of Hamas, the continued murder and assassination of Palestinian journalists, and in the West Bank was what seeded it. But indeed, we're going to be doing a lot more. So I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I took it from where Azad left off and all the way to Ajag.
Well, Ireti, I think you've given me just so much food for thought, and what you're saying is so true because if I look at my career in broadcasting, in particular, it started off at a time when 9/11 had actually taken place, and at that point in time, I actually found out very, very quickly that not everything is black and white, and what we see and what is reported in the mainstream media, and there is always room for another angle. And at that point in time, I even called my show the alternative voice. And this, Mariam, I think is absolutely important. And I'd like you to comment on this, Mariam, because offering that alternative as independent media, as opposed to mainstream media, and we know even here in South Africa, and we're talking about the African continent, you've monitored mainstream media, how mainstream media has actually covered this genocide as well. And as Azad referred to, the dependency on Western mainstream media in particular. So, this is not just about media, it is not just about reporting, but it is embracing media as a humanitarian. And this is the reason why Salam Media focuses on humanitarian journalism. But as a journalist, as a presenter, as a radio or a television personality, it is all about you as a human being and also media activism, which is absolutely important. And this, when one looks at the African continent, we don't see it. We don't see that level of activism. And this is the reason why, Ireti speaks about African journalists against the genocide.
Absolutely, Uncle Inait. I think what both Azad and Ireti have highlighted, if I could just reduce it into a couple of sentences, is essentially the disconnect between civilians and just African citizens and their governments. So we know that majority of Africans support the Palestinians because they themselves are living under oppressive regimes. However, this is where, the issue around the visa, the US visa regime comes in, and questions about to what extent are African journalists willing to, literally put their jobs on the line to speak out. And as we said, it's not just about Palestine. I think it's very important for us to always connect and reconnect the idea that Zionism is perhaps a subset of the colonial mindset that still remains. And as we have white nationalism, we have supremacism, all of that kind of, they each of them are part of a bigger picture. So in my view, I think the thing is what the role of media should be is to, at least independent media, is to find ways to make those connections. So we talk about grassroots, right? And I think we did discuss this at some point as well on our previous shows. It's about looking at how does the monopolization of utilities, for example, in African countries by multinationals, how does that affect the ordinary person in terms of, the amount they have to pay, how much access they actually have to basic essentials, which is either healthcare, education, water, and so on. And how does this connect to the issue around the expansion, not just of the Israeli state, but of the global capitalist system? And it sounds, perhaps overwhelming to think that, it's us versus this entire economic system. But I think it's very important, especially if we want to access, as Ireti has said, the youth that make up, the predominant proportion of this continent, our youth. If we want to be able to connect with them and overcome this, what we say, the unlucky scenario of having bad leaders, we need to be able to make those links. And I think independent journalism is critical here. And film festivals and so on are wonderful. But what we need to do really is to capacitate and to bring that down, to the community level. So South Africa is very fortunate to have this community radio stations and so on, which I think when it was just launched was, almost revolutionary for us. If you think about Bush radio in the past and what role it played. But in today's, in the current context, we need social media training. We absolutely need, our youth to have access to that. And then also to breach the divide of the language barrier. So Ireti often points out on the group on the African Journalists Against Genocide that we need translators, we need somebody to translate into French, and obviously there's Arabic. So we have to be mindful of these things as well as African journalists. And I think it speaks to so much more than just the concept of unwillingness to cover an issue. It really ties in with the class changes that have happened, phenomenal class changes over the past 2 decades in Africa. So where we're seeing, the replacement basically of the elites, where those who were once revolutionaries are now in power. And we see that, in South Africa very clearly. The appetite for really projecting the revolutionary cause or freedom as such for oppressed people becomes, it's something that's good for voting for the election season. And after that, we don't hear about it.